Hey, it's been a while since I made a video. Let's talk about that.
We're sorry. All circuits are busy now.
So, after I did the Windows 98 PC video, I had two major problems. The first one was simply, where do I go from here? And the second, far worse problem was, oh no, it keeps breaking. And I don't mean in small ways like I needed to reinstall Windows 98. I mean catastrophic hardware failure, like the motherboard can no longer remember its own BIOS settings in between restarts. That part alone set me back at least 8 months, because the only other way I could get a replacement motherboard was a single guy on eBay who tries to sell them as complete computers for $200 and then another $150 in shipping. And before someone asks, for the record, I did ask him, can I just buy the motherboard? And he said no. So that's one half of the equation. I physically could not make more video content about the 98 PC. And the other one was I just was extremely depressed from my day job at AWS. Thankfully, that is now my former day job as of early May of this year. Also, just an FYI for other tech people, please never work for AWS. It is literally the worst goddamn company in the world. Now, some of you may be wondering, hold on, he said 8 months. That video came out a year ago. What has he been doing for the last 4 months, other than playing Factorio for some horrible reason? And that comes to the current problem. The Windows 98 PC does technically run again. It has a new motherboard. But, just like last year when I went through no less than about a dozen Radeon graphics cards, I have now gone through 4 different sound cards. The reason for that is simple. The Audigy 2 that I use is well known for being one of the victims of the capacitor plague that affected the early to mid 2000s. Originally, I thought the issue was just simply audio interference because I was using crappy cables. It turns out that these capacitors are actually the power supply for the main CPU on the sound card. Unfortunately, this means even when I am doing digital capture using Toslink, what this means is that audio sounds like this, and obligatory preemptive headphone warning. And this isn't even a driver issue, because one of the things I was going to demonstrate on the 98 PC was Windows XP.
Hi there, I'm Adam, Prince of Eternia. This is my kitty Miss.
Huge apology to all the headphone users who just had to endure that. I promise that I enjoyed it just as much while editing it, of course. So, naturally, like many people in the 2000s who were just sick of PC problems, I bought a Mac. So, I actually buried the lead a little bit with the start of this video. I actually bought this Power Mac G5 Quad over a year ago. I also paid an amount for it that I am not willing to say on record. Instead, I will just show the eBay transaction on screen. The reason I purchased this specific unit, for those that don't know, is the Power Mac G5 Quad was the fastest machine Apple ever made in terms of PowerPC equipment. And as we all know...
Now, I believe in speed. Power.
You try and see.
Power and speed solves many things.
Yes.
Right.
James, how far?
Middle of the puddle.
Speed and power.
And for those that have either been in my Discord live streams or are familiar with the PowerMac G5 Quad, you probably know where this is going to go next.
Foreshadowing is a narrative device in which suggestions or warnings about events to come are dropped or planted.
So, back to where we were. First thing I wanted to do was get modern Linux running on a G5 Quad. This actually proved to be more difficult than I had anticipated. For those that don't know, PowerPC lived on past Apple's transition to Intel-based machines. IBM kept it alive as the Power Instruction Set Architecture, or ISA, and you can still get new ones today. If you have things like a bank account, the mainframes that run all of those credit card transactions every single day are most likely Power machines. However, the machine we have is a little bit different. It runs in what's known as big endian mode. I don't want to get into the weeds of the difference between big and little endian type systems, but the TLDR is if you compile a program for big endian, you can't run it on little endian, and vice versa. AMD and Intel CPUs have always been little endian, so it's very likely IBM just changed to little endian just to make development easier. This comes back to bite us in particular, because the NVIDIA open source driver on Linux, Nouveau, doesn't actually support big endian anymore, simply because the developers don't have hardware to test that. What that means is if you boot Linux by default on PowerPC or PowerPC 64-bit systems, you will almost immediately just have the system crash. And in fact, you can witness it now happening in the background. Unfortunately, the system I'm using only has a 4x CD-ROM drive, so it actually takes quite a long time to boot Linux on a CD, but as soon as the system loads, it does this, and then has to be manually rebooted. I have actually reached out to the Nouveau developers and personally offered to give them access to both a G5 and a G4, running a NVIDIA 6600 and a 4600 respectively, for them to debug the issue, but they have politely informed me that it's not a very high priority at this time. However, since we're going to be using this G5 as a server to build PowerPC programs, that was not a problem.
The PowerPC from Motorola, because what you want inside is a future.
So let's skip ahead a little bit. We now have Linux running on the Apple PowerMac G5 Quad. We have an extremely fast PowerPC workstation with a whopping 16 gig of memory, which may not sound like a lot today, but keep in mind this machine came out in 2005. 16 gig of memory back then was quite a lot for a workstation. The first thing I'm going to do, however, is I'm going to have this machine talk to an even faster computer using what's known as distcc. This program lets me take building software from one computer and distribute it across other computers on the network. If you ever looked at something like Folding at Home or things like that, where they take a very large problem and just sort of break it up into smaller segments so that it can be worked on by multiple computers at the same time, this is the exact same thing, but specifically for building computer applications. The purpose of this is I can basically take the AMD EPYC CPU in my NAS, which is about on par with a Ryzen 5950X, and I can just directly channel all of its processing power into building programs for a completely different computer. And since it's almost 18 years newer than the G5 Quad, it is quite a bit faster. Fortunately, we now reach the part of this video where things take a bit of a turn.
You were made as well as we could make you, but not to last. The light that burns twice as bright burns half as long, and you have burned so very, very brightly, Roy.
If this video seems a lot shorter than something you would maybe expect from me, or a lot more abrupt, then you're not alone, because this really wasn't where I intended to start this series out. This is simply where I'm at the time of recording. Apple's G5 Quads are rather notorious for having a liquid cooling system installed in them, made by General Motors subsidiary Delphi, who were the manufacturers of GM's radiators. And these systems are not like what you would find in a modern PC's water cooling system. These are car radiators designed to fit inside of a Mac. They even use antifreeze rather than something like distilled water, because PC water cooling was very much just sort of a niche hobbyist thing. It hadn't really blown up in the way it has in the last 10 years, let alone been done on a Mac. Unfortunately, 18 years later, this introduces a number of problems. The first one being, the antifreeze only has a chemical life of 5 years, and then you're expected to replace it, just like in a regular car where you have to replace the coolant fluid every few years. The other much more catastrophic problem is that these coolers had a bad habit of leaking and completely destroying the entire machine. The upside is that the ones that have leaked have pretty much all leaked over the last 18 years. The downside is the ones that do remain, their coolant is long past its expiration date, and no longer acts as a coolant, but more of a sand, and needs to be quite literally flushed out and replaced, otherwise the machine is inoperable as it will immediately overheat. Unfortunately, this is where my G5 Quad now lives. It will boot up for about 30 seconds and then will immediately stop with an overheat message. And unfortunately, that's where we are at the moment. I have given my G5 Quad to a local friend who works on a lot of cars with the request that he drain and refill the water cooler, and hopefully that will resolve the issue. Otherwise, I'm going to need a new G5 Quad. As for what I'm going to do with these PowerPC machines, I do have a G4 that I'm using in the interim. However, to say it is slower is very much an understatement. Building a Linux kernel on the G5 Quad took about 30 minutes. Doing one on the G4 with 2 processors takes over 6 hours, as I demonstrated on a live stream. I do hope that when I have part 2 of this video ready to go, I will have some better news, but if not, then part 2 may be delayed, simply due to how long it takes me to build software using this much slower G4 machine. Just a quick addendum to this video before I upload it, I actually purchased 2 Mac G5 liquid cooling systems, with the intention of draining and refilling the one on the left, and then doing a complete rebuild with brand new tubes, pumps, and other parts of the unit on the right. But in true Apple fashion, Apple has made this as difficult as possible, as you can see here from this video I took. So you took off the rubber sheath,
yep,
the rubber dong,
and then it's got the dick right here,
and it's just pure epoxy. Just a pure glob of epoxy that almost looks like a face from the other side. This is the mood.
Yeah.